Good morning, everybody. It's day 3, the final day of the virtual Freeform Festival. My name's Tony Moore, and I am very thrilled to be hosting and presenting another morning and afternoon of incredible masterclasses and Meet the Maker discussions. So for those of you who have been part of this whole journey over the last 3 days, I want to say what an exciting and innovative idea it's been. And I'm very proud to be a part of this. Having been part of Freeform almost since day one, it's great to be able to still do this in a virtual way and actually have the ability now to reach even more people and share essential information, fascinating ideas, and inspirational people. Talking of which, today we are going to be starting with a masterclass in making gluten-free bread rolls and scones or scones. Maybe we will also identify whether it's scones or scones. We're going to be joined by award-winning nutritionist and chef Christine Bailey. And, following a gluten-free diet sometimes can feel like you're missing out. So this is particularly true when it comes to bread. If you hanker after light, fluffy, and flavoursome bread, then this cookery demo is definitely for you. Nutritionist, chef, and celiac Christine Bailey will share one of her popular bread recipes from her new ebook, Gluten-Free Bread Recipes. 32 delicious and easy gluten-free breads, rolls, bagels, pizzas, and more, which is also available on Amazon. So without further ado, let's go over to the beautiful kitchen and meet and listen to and watch some incredible masterclass information about making bread rolls and scones from Christine Bailey.
Thank you so much, Tony. Wow, what an introduction. And yes, this is my kitchen at home. And I pretty much, with being a celiac and also having children with allergies, I'm pretty much baking bread every day. And so I've spent years developing recipes, trying to optimize nutrition as well, being a nutritionist. And that's why really during lockdown, I produced the new ebook. I have a whole range of different nutrition and health books. But this one, which I'm really proud of, is really answering the questions I get from a lot of my clients is, I just want to be able to enjoy decent bread, decent rolls, when I'm either avoiding gluten or avoiding gluten and dairy, which is very, very common. So let's get started. I want to show you 2 recipes this morning, and please feel free to ask me any questions about a gluten-free diet or nutrition, or your journey into the whole gluten-free, free-from sector, because it is sometimes a little bit overwhelming if you've only just been, say, diagnosed as a celiac or just found out that you can't eat gluten anymore. So my first recipe is a very, very simple, and I love simple recipes. It's a pull-apart gluten-free bread roll. And this is actually made in a cake tin, which might sound a little bit strange, but it's so, so simple. And one of those easy recipes that doesn't really require much effort at all. So let me show you how to make it. The only thing you have to do when you're sort of doing bread recipes with yeast is obviously allow yourself about an hour to prove that bread. But rest of it is very, very hassle-free. And if anything, gluten-free baking is easier than normal baking. But now it might sound a little bit strange, but you're not doing any kneading. When I was at chef's school and we were making traditional breads, we were doing a whole lot of kneading. Well, most gluten-free bread recipes, you actually end up more with a batter rather than a stiff bread. That's not true for all of them. I show you in my new ebook a range of platted breads, and that we chill it overnight in order to be able to plat it. But this one is very, very simple. So the first thing we're going to do is we've got here about 200 mils of warm water, just tepid water. So when you stick your finger in, should feel fairly warm, not boiling, because we are going to be using yeast today. And all I'm going to do with that is just put my yeast in. This is just 1 sachet of the fast-acting yeast that you can get in all the supermarkets. And I'm just going to give that a little bit of a stir. Now, I often get questions about, can I just do this in a bread maker? And actually, you know what, you can. The proving bit, you could just put all of these ingredients in your bread maker. And I don't know if you can see in the background, but I have a bread maker that is pretty much on every day, just saves me some hassle. But you don't need a bread maker. But you could just put all these ingredients in your bread maker, put it on a proving setting. So on mine, I've got a Panasonic. It's sort of, the proving settings are 22 and 23. And then when it's done its bit, you can then follow the recipe afterwards. So if you really want less hassle, that's another easy option. Now, I'm going to use a range of flours today. And if you've got any questions about the gluten-free flours, because it can be a bit overwhelming, just ask me. But you could use a gluten-free bread flour mix, something like the Free by Dove's Farm in this recipe, if you haven't got various bread flours. But I just thought it'd be a good idea just to introduce you to some of the other flours. Now, in here, I've got a combination, I hope you can see this, of sorghum and brown rice flour. Now, I like these flours. They combine really well. They also have a higher fiber content. So from me, from a nutritionist point of view, that's something that I'm really looking for. Sorghum, and I'm actually using the Bob's Flour one, but you can get it from Ship to Mill. You can get it from a lot of producers now. Has a mild, slightly sweet flavour. So it's not going to overpower your bread, and it's very high in antioxidants. They're both very good forms of fibre, and that can be missing sometimes in gluten-free bread recipes, is that you just don't get the fibre. So that's my sorghum and brown rice flour. And then, because those are quite dry flours, you then need some more starch when you're combining flours. Now, I give you all the details in the ebook, so I tell you how you can combine it if you're a little bit confused. But in here, I've got some tapioca. And again, that's a starch. So you often use tapioca to add a bit more moisture and to help it bind. And then I've also got some potato flour. You can use potato starch or potato flour. Potato flour is a little bit coarser, but it lends itself well in bread recipes. And those are the three flours. Now, you could, if you haven't got those flours, you could just use 390 grams of the Free by Dove's Farm gluten-free bread flour. And they do a brown flour version, which will have a little bit more fibre in that. And I'm really keen on trying to lower the glycemic index so it's not too starchy. So by having those more nutritious flours in there, you improve the overall nutritional content and also the fibre content as well. So you can see that I'm just doing this in a mixing bowl. You don't need anything complicated, but you could just stick this in a bread maker if you wanted. So those are being mixed up. Now, that will produce a really nice crumb because I've got the dry and also the more starchy flours together. Now, this is going to be a more savoury bread roll. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just some dry mixed herbs. Now, you could make this a sweet one if you preferred. You could add a little bit more sugar and you could add some dried fruit, for example. But I quite like these with soups and stews. So I'm making it a bit more savoury. Now, I'm not going to put any dairy in this. So this is gluten-free and dairy-free as well. And so for a little bit of extra flavour, I'm using these. These are nutritional yeast flakes. These have a slightly cheesy flavour, but they just give the bread a little bit more of a tang, and great with soups and stews. And I quite often will use nutritional yeast flakes. You can get them fortified with B vitamins, particularly B12 if you're vegan. But they add that sort of extra tang and cheesy flavour. So those are going in as well. Now, I'm also going to add just a little bit of baking powder that gives it a bit more lightness and just a little bit of xanthan gum. Now, often breads will have a binding agent. Xanthan gum is very common, but if you can't tolerate xanthan gum, and all of this is obviously gluten-free, you could use psyllium husks instead. Now, I love psyllium husks. Psyllium husks will often come either as the husk, which is finer, or the very ground powder. Just a little tip. If you're new to psyllium and you want to use it in bread recipes, use the husks because it's lighter and you're not going to get such a gloopy bread. But again, these are all details that I put in the recipes in the ebook, so you don't need to worry. But that's another way of adding extra fibre as well. Then I've just got a little bit of sugar to help the yeast rise. Then I've got a little bit of fat. Now this is just dairy-free spread. You could use a soft butter if you weren't dairy-free. And what this does, again, it helps to provide a nicer moisture texture. It also makes sure that the bread will keep for a little bit. So often one of the complaints when you're making gluten-free bread is that it's great on the day you make it, but after that, it's a little bit stale. By adding a little bit of fat, you provide moisture, you help the crumb, but you also will help it to last a couple of days as well. Now, the breads will freeze. So if you wanted to make a range of the breads, you can then just put them in the freezer. They will keep for up to 3 months in the freezer. So you don't need to worry about that either. Okay, then we're going to add some more richness. This is a rich yeasted bread. So I've got here 3 eggs, and those are just going in. And then we're going to pour in our liquid as well. So I've put the yeast in here. That's just foaming nicely. That's the fast action yeast. That's just 1 sachet. And then we're going to add just a little bit of salt. And then finally, and this is important, this really helps with the rising, is just a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. It could be any vinegar. That's just what I happen to have. And I often use apple cider vinegar in a lot of the yeasted bread recipes. If you've ever tried making a gluten-free bread and you put it in, say, a bread maker, and it rises and you've got this great big hole at the top, has anyone done that? That's often because it's over risen. And what the apple cider vinegar does is it helps to stop those great big holes and gaps. So then you are simply just going to beat this. I mean, this is actually a really easy recipe to get children involved as well, because it's so straightforward. And I just want to show you what I mean by the fact that it's not a firm dough that you would need. This is more like a cake batter. So just give it a really good beat. If your butter or dairy-free spread is quite soft, this should really come together very, very easily. So let me just show you there. I'm just gonna, Chris, do you want to just do a little close-up so people can really see what the texture's like? So you can see there, it's almost dropping consistency, like so. So don't worry, if you make this bread and you think, gosh, that's really liquidy, that's exactly what it should be like. Now at this stage, thank you, Chris, that's really kind. What you're then going to do is allow it to prove. Now, sometimes when you're making bread recipes, you actually want to give it 2 proofs. You don't have to with this bread. It's very forgiving, actually. But I am going to. It's fairly cold today. Now, this is one of my tips that I often use. These are just shower caps. Now, it might sound a little bit strange, but whenever I'm making breads or anything that needs to just be left alone, rise, I will just take a big shower cap, put it over my glass bowl and just leave it. Saves the hassle. These I just wash and reuse, so it's saving as well. You're not having to use loads of cling or anything like that. Now, ideally give that about an hour. If you haven't got time, it doesn't matter, because you can just move on to the next stage. And this is where you are using a cake. So I'm going to just grab a spare cake tin, and I just want to show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take this batter. Now, normally I would leave this to rise for another hour or so. This is a 9-inch springform cake tin. Springform just makes it so much easier to get it out afterwards. I have lightly greased this just with a little bit of olive oil. And I've also got here an ice cream scoop. And I've just greased the inside just so that it's easier to use. Now, you don't need an ice cream spoon, you can just use a big spoon. But what you're going to do is you're going to take spoonfuls of this batter and you're going to place it around the cake tin. So you'll probably get about 6 to 8 rolls, depending on the sizes. So just take a big scoop, and then we're going to place it into the tin. And we're just going to continue to do that, spacing them just a little bit apart, because we want distinct rolls that we can then break apart when it's being cooked. And what we'll do is we'll place one in the center as well. So just get the rough position of your rolls. So I've got 5 round the outside, and I'll hold this up in a minute. And then I'm just going to use up the rest of the batter just to build up my rolls. Now, at this point, you might think, gosh, they're a bit of a weird shape. That's fine, because what we're then going to do is we're then going to, and I'm just going to move that right out the way. We're then just going to get a little bit of water. We're going to dip our hands, and this is a great technique if you want to shape a batter that's not, not very firm. Just put your hands in a little bit of water. You could use a bit of oil. And then what you're just going to do is you're just going to smooth the tops of your rolls so that you are making very distinct round shapes. That way, when this then rises, they will still remain distinct shapes. Now, at this point, and you don't need to glaze these rolls because they're very moist anyway. At this point, if you want to, you could take some herbs or some nuts and seeds, which is what I'm going to use, and you could just sprinkle them over your bread. And you're going to do this at this stage, and then you're going to again allow the rolls to just rise a little bit more. You don't have to put the seeds on. Sometimes what I'll do is just put a few extra chopped herbs on. Again, get your shower cap and you're going to cover it, and then you're going to leave that probably for around about 45 minutes. And just like the Blue Peter, I do have one that I have probably allowed about half an hour, 45 minutes. So you can see that it's now nicely risen, but you still got those distinct shapes because then you can break it apart. At that point, get your oven on. You want to be able to put the bread in a hot oven. Now, this is not really high temperature. When you're baking bread, sometimes you're going up to about 220. For this one, it's only about 190. So that's about gas mark 5. And you're going to be cooking this in total just for half an hour, that's all. And if you find that it's starting to brown towards the end, you can just cover the top with a little bit of foil. Now, a big tip, try and allow the bread to cool properly. One thing, it's not so important for a roll where you're going to break it apart, but when you're trying to slice bread, allow it properly time to cool. When it's cooling, and ideally on a rack, so that it's airing, it develops the crumbs and it makes it much, much easier to slice. Now I've got one over here as well. I just want to show you, because if you want to, you could actually bake it in, this is just a Savarin mold cake tin. So you could do exactly the same thing, but make it in a Savarin mold instead. So there's lots of different variations of this, and I just want to show you what you can then do is you can then break it apart. So you've got your distinct little shaped rolls, and then that can just be sliced and served. That's light and fluffy. I hope you can see that, but it's lovely and light and fluffy. It's not dense, and having that combination of flours really helps to make it light and fluffy without it being really heavy, but you still got fibre in there. And if you wanted to, you could also stir in some seeds in that as well. So I'm hoping that's a really good introduction. If you've never really made gluten-free bread or rolls, this is a very, very simple one to do. And this is perfect for soups and stews, but equally, if you wanted to, you could break them apart, wrap them, freeze them for up to 3 months as well. And then you can just take out a piece when you want to. So brilliant rolls, and great easy recipe to do. So hopefully that helps with the first recipe, to give you a few little tips. And then how about making, this is again a really good one to get children involved, how about making some gluten-free, dairy-free scones? Now I say scones, I think that's probably because I don't know whether I'm Southern or not. My parents are Northern, but I've been brought up in Berkshire pretty much, most of them, well, Hitchin in Hertfordshire and Berkshire now, so I'm sort of Southern now. But I say scones. Anyway, that's another discussion. But this is a really, really simple recipe. And you can make these sweet, or you could make these savoury. I'm going to make fruit scones. You can see some of the ones we've got over here. I'm just going to move and grab them. But you can see that they're lovely and light and risen. And hopefully you'll be able to easily make these without any fuss. Now, these are also dairy-free as well. Again, if you wanted to, you could use butter, but you could use dairy-free spread as well. So I'm going to get my flour. I'm just going to get someone to get the butter in the fridge. You could use dairy-free spread or butter. Now, this is a gluten-free, I'm actually using the self-raising flour from Dove's. You don't have to, you could use plain flour and just add baking powder. So I think it's in a little bowl in there. Thank you. Someone's just going to grab that for me. So I've got in here 225 grams of self-raising flour, gluten-free self-raising flour. And I'll give you some little tips about how you can vary this if you want to flavour it and make it perhaps more savoury. Now, again, I am going to use just a little bit of xanthan gum to bind it. You could use chia seeds, flax seeds, psyllium husks if you want. I just find that they come together a little bit better with the xanthan gum. There are loads of recipes in the ebook which are yeast-free, don't contain xanthan gum. You know, there's a lot suitable for example, low FODMAP, if you're also low FODMAP as well, and a lot of variations if you want them vegan or dairy-free as well. So I've kept it very, very broad. And you've got recipes such as croissants in there if you really want to get into gluten-free baking, which my children absolutely love. So I'm going to make these sweet. So I've got in here, now this won't be low FODMAP friendly because I'm using just a tablespoon of xylitol, or you could use erythritol. Now I use those quite a lot, because they are low glycemic sugar replacements. Xylitol comes from birch trees, very, very safe, safe for diabetics as well, doesn't cause spikes in your blood sugar. But I mean, you could use just a tablespoon of castor sugar or coconut sugar, so it's not like we're using a huge amount. You could also just leave that out anyway. And I would probably leave it out if I was just doing a savory one. I do like just to add just a tiny bit of salt there. Then I'm just going to give that just a quick stir. And then I've got, now this is the time that you would chill it. So I've got my spread and it's only 50 grams. So I've got here 225 grams of flour. If you're using plain flour, I would suggest using a couple of teaspoons of baking powder as well. Then just a little dash of salt and xanthan gum. Very, very simple recipe. There's no eggs in this, so this is vegan if you're using the dairy-free spread. And this is just very basic cooking. You're going to be rubbing in. So try and keep your fingers nice and light and airy as you're rubbing in. Again, really good techniques for children. I do a lot of cooking days for children. We do stuff online now as well. And one of the first techniques that you get them to do is rubbing in. And it's a really good way of getting them involved in cooking. So keep it nice and light and airy. You're using just the tips of your fingertips when you're rubbing in. And this will develop a nice crumb. And the lighter you can get these, the better. Scones are one of those things that you don't want to be over processing or over folding, over rolling. You want to keep it very light. The more you play around with it, the sort of more dense they become. You want lovely light scones. And again, with scones, they are best on the day that they are made, to be honest. Now this will make around about 4 or 6, depending on how big you want them. So it's not a huge amount. So generally, if you've got a family of hungry teenagers, these are likely to be devoured very, very quickly. So rubbing it in. Now, if you wanted to make these savoury, at this point, instead of using, I'm using sultanas, you could actually just stir in a little bit of dairy-free cheese or regular cheese if you're not dairy-free. Sun-dried tomatoes chopped up work really well. And also sometimes what I do is chop up some black peppers with some herbs and stir those in. So it's a very, very sort of reliable recipe for making a whole range of different flavors. So there I've got my crumb. Now at this point, I'm going to stir in any flavoring. So I've got just about 30 to 40 grams of sultanas. Now, just a little tip. If your dried fruit is really quite hard, particularly when you're dealing with, say, raisins, they can be really quite hard. What I like to do is actually pour some boiling water over them, allow them to soak for about 5 or 10 minutes, then drain them really well, then add them. And that way you get very moist dried fruit, because obviously you're going to bake this, and it's just easier. It's much more nicer texture. So if they're a bit hard, maybe they've been in your cupboard for a while, just pour over some boiling water, refresh them, drain them off, and then they're ready to go. Now in here, because I'm keeping this one dairy-free, I've got here just soya milk, about 140, with the juice of about half a lemon, so about 1 to 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And I've just let it sort of soak there. And that's just effectively a different way of creating your own dairy-free buttermilk. You could also use yogurt. So you could use a soya yogurt or even a coconut yogurt, and that will work really well. If you're not dairy free, you could use buttermilk. So again, we can change this recipe to suit multiple allergies if we want. So 140 mils, and you don't have to let it soak for very long. It's literally about, 5-10 minutes, that's it. And then you're going to stir it first. And then as you bring that mixture together, this is where you'll get your hands in there. So I'm just going to bring that together with the spatula, and it should be moist, but not too wet. So I'm going to just bring that out and show you. Now, at this point, you don't need a rolling pin to make scones at all. At this point, just make sure you've got a little bit, not a lot, of flour, just dusting your work surface. And then what I'm going to do is take my hands and just press this against the side of the bowl so that you're then bringing the mixture together. And as you do that, because originally you might think, oh, it's a little bit dry, it should be just slightly damp, not too wet. And I've been making scones for years, and this recipe never fails me and always creates a lovely light scone. So you can see there it's come together, and then you're just going to very, very gently dust it just a little bit in some flour, not a lot. You don't want to make it dry. Don't need a rolling pin for this at all. All you're going to do is just press it down, and then I've just got a regular cookie cutter, and then you're just going to cut your scones. Now at this point, don't be kneading it, don't be pressing it down too firmly, because if you do, you're just going to end up with a sort of quite a dense scone. Have our baking tray ready. I've got it with some grease-proof paper here, and then just take your cutter and press down. Try not to twist it too much. I tend to just take my dough away, and then you can just re-roll that, and then you can press it down. And then just, if it's a little bit out of shape, just use the sides of your hands to shape your scone, and then we're just going to place it on. And the great thing is that this is a great recipe where you can just reshape it, re-roll it, press down again, and you're just going to continue. So you can use up all your dough by just bringing it back together. It shouldn't be too dry, and then just pressing it down, no rolling pins needed. Cut your scones, put them on. Now again, at this point, and obviously I will be using all of that in a little bit later after our demo, at this point, if you want a nice golden finish, give it a little bit of a glaze. Now, if you're vegan, don't use egg. You could use a beaten egg, but equally in here, all I've got is just a little bit of extra soy milk. You could use coconut milk, you could use almond milk, and we're just going to brush the tops. And just a little tip, always brush the sides as well. If you like it nice and golden, you don't want to be pressing your scones down, so do it nice and lightly. But by just brushing the edges, you get that lovely sort of golden glaze all the way around your scones. And these will take about 12-15 minutes maximum in the oven. Again, this is where you are going to use a higher temperature, so 220 degrees, so that's gas mark 7, 12 to 15 minutes. And when they are done, they will look like these. And I'll just bring these over so hopefully you can see. And it may be a good time to just cut one open to show you what they're like. But these are absolutely delicious for a tea time treat. But if you're making a savoury one, you know, again, really good idea for soups and stews, for example. So I just want to show you, you know, these rise really, really well. Loads of lovely dried fruit in there, a brilliant treat, and always lovely and light and fluffy. So those are my two recipes for today. Both of them are in the ebook, which is my new gluten-free ebook. If you have a child that suffers with a range of allergies, whether it's IgE or IgG allergies, then you might want to get My Kids Can't Eat That, which has a whole section on nutrition, meal planning, snacks, as well as lots of recipes. And those recipes also have a range of options, so that if you have multiple allergies, then it will cope with those as well and give you just a few extra ideas as well. And then if you suffer with more IBS or gut infections, or you're on a low FODMAP diet, then the gut health diet is probably a really good book for you. But Tony, shall I hand over to you for any questions?
Yes, I mean, I first of all, I just want to say that was an amazing way to start a Sunday morning. It's like the perfect Sunday morning, fabulous bread and fabulous scones. And you did it so beautifully and effectively. We've got quite a few people watching right now. So if anyone does have any questions they would like to pop in the chat box, I will be able to see them and I can ask. But I already do have one question I'd like to ask, and that's about gluten-free sourdough. How would you, what flours would you use to create the starter for that?
Brilliant. And it's so easy. I mean, everyone again thinks, oh, sourdough. I know it became very popular in lockdown because yeast seemed to be something we could never get hold of. But actually making your own gluten-free sourdough is very, very simple. Interestingly, what I do is I use a mix of the sorghum and brown rice. So you use an equal quantity of brown rice and sorghum, partly because they have some protein in them and some fiber, but it's the protein that really helps create your sourdough starter. Then you need to give yourself 5 days before you start making your bread, because you need to create your sourdough starter. And all you do is you mix those flours together, you add some cool distilled or boiled water. So you don't want water straight from the tap. You want to make sure it hasn't got the impurities in. So you boil your water, you cool it down, you add it to your flours, you create a thin batter, almost a bit like a light cake batter. You cover it, and then every day, sometimes twice a day, I've got all the details in the ebook, you allow it to ferment. So you leave it out at room temperature. You can put it in little jars like this or little bowls, just cover it. And every day you're going to feed it. So you're going to give it some extra brown rice flour and extra sorghum flour, a little bit of extra water, stir it again, cover it, leave it. And after a couple of days, it will start to look really bubbly. And that's your sourdough starter. And then you're going to use your sourdough starter to make bread. And again, in the ebook, there's a couple of different recipes for sourdough, plus the instructions how to make the starter. But it's a very, very easy thing to make. Everyone gets quite scared about, oh, it's not going to work. It's very straightforward. And, you know, typically whatever you can do with normal gluten flours, you can do with gluten-free flours. You just have to know the combinations of the flours. So hopefully that helps. But it's very easy to do.
Fascinating. So basically you just have to plan a little bit ahead with the starter and give yourself a few days to really get that ready to go, and then you're off and running. And I'm guessing that the same in pizzas then, for sourdough pizzas.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's nice actually is the sorghum flour has a slightly mild nutty flavour. And when you combine it with something like brown rice flour, actually it develops a really nice crumb. And you've made a really good point. You could use exactly the same recipes as I do for the breads to make a sourdough pizza. I also have a couple of recipes in the book for pizza anyway. And the other nice thing about sourdough starters is once you do have it prepared, you know, after the three or 5 days, is all you need to do is really keep feeding it, and then you've got the starter ready. So then you can make bread daily using your sourdough starter. And you just take a small amount of it, you use it in a recipe, you've got the rest there, you carry on feeding it, and you can be making bread pretty much every day if you want to.
Right, so as long as you keep that starter well fed, it's like perpetual bread making.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's about getting the momentum started at the beginning.
Yeah, and if you're going away as well, say you're going away for a weekend, you think, oh, I can't really feed it, because it feels like a little animal that you have to keep feeding. You can put your sourdough starter in the fridge, and then you can leave it in there for a week or so, and then just bring it back into room temperature, refeed it, and it's ready to go again.
Brilliant. So simple. Many of these things in life are simple. It's just if it's a different world for people, especially people who are first embracing these new ways of doing things, it can be so overwhelming and confusing as to where to start. So your presentation and your books are so simple to be able to take people step by step in that world, right?
Absolutely. And you don't even have to, I mean, I know I've mentioned a few different flours today, but you don't even have to do that. You can start off with these ready prepared blends, you know, like the free bread flour and the self-raising flour and the plain flour. So you don't even have to think, oh, I've got to spend a fortune on 4 or 5 different flours. As you get more confident, you can say, do you know what? I want to try buckwheat, or I want to try teff. You know, you can try these other flours, and I've given a lot of description in the ebook about those different flours, how you can use them. But, you know, some of the other flours are incredibly nutritious. I mean, teff, for example, is a great Ethiopian derived flour that is used to make almost sort of thin pancakes. And you can use it to make waffles, pancakes, batters, cookies. So once you get confident, you can start having a, you know, play around with all these different flours.
Fantastic. And of course, we were talking a little earlier, we're heading towards Christmas at an enormous speed. And do you have any tips for kind of Christmas breads or Christmas creations?
Yeah, well, I've got a confession here, Tony. Yesterday, I actually made my first batch of mince pies. Can you believe it? Just because I wanted to. And shortly I'll be, you know, it will be the sort of cook along for making your own Christmas cakes, Christmas puddings. And some of the flours I really like for things like the cakes and the puddings, because those are richer recipes, is using things like the buckwheat flours, the sorghum flours, or you could use some brown rice flour as well. And they create a much richer flavour. And, you know, Christmas cake is quite rich and dense anyway. So, you know, you only need a small amount of flour. But the other thing is that, you know, hopefully we'll be running another demo closer to Christmas anyway, and I can show you a whole range of things. You know, actually you can use most of the mincemeat that you buy, you can make your own, but most of the mincemeats are gluten-free. Just do check the labels. That's one thing I would say, because one brand may not be the same quite as another brand. So don't assume everything is gluten-free. Always be checking labels. But once you've mastered pastry, and that's something that perhaps I'll be showing you when we do the Christmas demo, you know, you can make your own mince pies, you can be making different savoury tarts as well. And actually, there's no reason why we can't start now, because most of the things either keep really well and actually do better when you keep them, like Christmas pudding, for example, or they'll freeze well as well. And actually, with the scone recipe, this would be brilliant. Instead of using sultanas, just stir in some mincemeat, and then you've got mincemeat scones, for example. So that would be, you know, an easy way of just jazzing up and getting slightly festive already.
Absolutely. Well, I think that was the bell to say we finished now, wasn't it? You timed that perfectly, Christine.
Oh dear. That's working at home for you.
Listen, I think we've run out of questions. I think you've answered every question that anyone could possibly have, because there's none in the chat box, which is fine. The sourdough question, which was brilliant, because that just gave a whole new insight into keeping that starter going and how to do it. So Christine, thank you so much. Just give everyone one more time a quick plug for the books, what's available, and how to find out more about you.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, christinebailey.co.uk. There are loads of free recipes on my website, tons of recipes. Every single recipe is gluten-free on my website. And also all the details of my books are also on the website. The ebook, which is now available, is on Amazon. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can get it for free. So just head over to Amazon, search for Christine Bailey gluten-free breads, and you will find the book as well. And I just want to thank you, Tony, and thank you, Margarita, as well. What a brilliant idea to do this Free From Festival, you know, encouraging everyone to get together in these strange times. And it's just a really pleasure for me to be involved.
Well, thank you very much. You were brilliant. It was a wonderful way to start our day today. And of course, this session will be available later on for people to review again. For those who watched it the first time and want to see in more detail in case they missed anything, and for people that didn't quite make it the first time round. So Christine, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tony.
Bye-bye. Right, now coming up in about 40 minutes time, we're going to take a break till 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, we have the session number 5 of Meet the Makers. And today we will be meeting the founders of Sorso, S-O-R-S-O, the Unrefined Bakery, Chocolatier, and Lovegrass. We will be talking to each of those to find out more in detail about their company, their business, their products, what they're doing, and plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So have a little break. We're going to be back in, as I say, just about 40 minutes time at 1 o'clock with the next Meet the Maker session. Until then, this is Tony Moore signing off. See you in a while.